Daniel Ellison, a 42-year-old marketing manager from Chicago, Illinois, had always believed that his life was the epitome of success. He had a steady job at a prominent tech company, a beautiful wife named Megan, and two wonderful children, Noah, an energetic 11-year-old, and Olivia, a thoughtful 9-year-old. Their home was a picture of happiness, filled with laughter, love, and the simple joys of daily life. Every weekend, they could be found cycling through the city's scenic parks or strolling through the local farmer's market, their routines a comforting rhythm they never questioned. Megan, a high school teacher, was the perfect partner. She was patient, kind, and dedicated to both her students and their family. Together they made the ideal team. The dynamic between Daniel and Megan was seamless, built on mutual respect and trust. Even the small disagreements were nothing more than fleeting moments that passed quickly, leaving no trace of conflict. For their 15th wedding anniversary, Daniel and Megan had planned a special celebration. They had already begun discussing how they would surprise each other, their excitement growing as the day approached. They had been married for over a decade, and their connection seemed unbreakable. Daniel believed that nothing could ever shake the foundation they had built, that their bond would continue to grow stronger with each passing year. But sometimes the unexpected creeps in, unnoticed at first, until it grows into something undeniable. Daniel's life, as perfect as it seemed, was about to take a sharp turn. A business trip to New York City, planned for the week before their anniversary, would become the catalyst for a chain of events he could never have anticipated. It was a typical trip for Daniel: meetings, presentations, and a whirlwind of activities. He had left for the city, confident that the routine he had left behind in Chicago would remain undisturbed. Megan, too, seemed content as she prepared for the party they had planned for when Daniel returned. Yet, everything started to feel off when he received an unexpected call from his best friend, Chris, late one evening. Chris was someone Daniel trusted implicitly, a man who had been a part of his life for years. When Chris spoke, Daniel listened closely. "I saw Megan," Chris said, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "She was with another man, at a hotel downtown. I didn't want to say anything, but I thought you should know." Daniel's heart skipped a beat. He tried to process the information, his mind racing to make sense of the words Chris had just spoken. Megan, the woman he had trusted, the mother of his children, was seen with someone else? The thought was absurd. He couldn't fathom it. Still, there was a part of him that couldn't ignore the nagging doubt. Why would Chris lie? What if there was more to the story than he knew? He tried to push the thought aside, telling himself that there had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe Megan was helping a colleague, or perhaps there was some innocent explanation for her being at a hotel with a man. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it began to grow. As the days passed in New York, Daniel found it harder and harder to focus on his work. The memory of Chris's words kept replaying in his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Megan's behavior in the days leading up to his trip hadn't been entirely normal. She had been distant at times, her eyes avoiding his as if there were something she wasn't telling him. He brushed it off, attributing it to the stress of their busy lives, but now, with Chris's revelation, everything felt different. By the time Daniel boarded his return flight to Chicago, he couldn't ignore the feeling in his stomach any longer. The perfect life he had once taken for granted seemed fragile, as if it could shatter with a single revelation. When he finally arrived back in Chicago, everything appeared to be just as he had left it. Megan was there to greet him, and their children ran to him with open arms. They had missed him, and for a moment, Daniel allowed himself to believe that everything was normal again. But the weight of his thoughts, of Chris's warning, hung over him like a storm cloud. That evening, as Megan went out to do some errands, Daniel's mind continued to churn. He tried to keep his distance, but his curiosity gnawed at him. Something didn't sit right. He couldn't shake the feeling that Megan had been hiding something from him. When Megan returned home later, carrying bags of groceries, the tension in the air was palpable. As she set the bags down on the kitchen counter, one of the smaller bags slipped from her grasp and fell to the floor. Daniel bent down to help, and that's when he noticed something unusual, a small box that had fallen out of the bag. He reached down and picked it up, his fingers trembling as he saw what was inside. A box of birth control pills. It was a detail that seemed insignificant at first, but to Daniel, it was like a hammer crashing down on him. Megan, who had never once mentioned the need for birth control, had never given any indication that anything was amiss in their relationship. Yet here was the evidence, lying in front of him. His mind raced, his body went cold. Could Chris have been right? Before he could process his thoughts, Megan walked back into the room and froze when she saw the pill box in his hand. Daniel's voice was tight, his words coming out almost as a whisper. "What is this, Megan?" She looked at him, her face paling and her eyes darted nervously. For a moment there was silence, then the words came. I didn't want you to find out this way, Daniel. I've been seeing someone else. His name is Tom. He's a colleague from school. It's been going on for months." The world seemed to stop. Daniel stood frozen, the truth sinking in like a cold weight in his chest. The woman he loved, the woman he had trusted with everything, had betrayed him. And just like that, the life he thought he knew crumbled. Daniel stood motionless, staring at the pillbox in his hand as Megan's words echoed in his mind. "I've been seeing someone else." The confession hit him like a punch to the stomach, leaving him breathless, unable to move. His body felt heavy, his thoughts jumbled and incoherent. He could barely process the shock that had just shattered his world. Megan stood there, her eyes filled with guilt, but there was no hiding the truth now. She had been seeing Tom, someone Daniel had never even heard of before. How long had it been going on? 6 months? It was a betrayal that seemed too much to comprehend, too much to accept. His mind raced, recalling all the moments that should have seemed out of place, but now felt like the harsh confirmation of everything he feared. "Megan, how could you?" Daniel finally managed to croak, his voice trembling with disbelief. He dropped the pillbox onto the counter, unable to keep holding it. He took a step back, his chest tightening with a mix of hurt and anger. "I never meant to hurt you," Megan said, her voice cracking. "I don't know how it happened. It just did. Tom and we started spending time together and it just felt like something I needed. I'm sorry, Daniel." Her apology felt hollow, like it wasn't enough. It wasn't even close. The woman who had promised to love him, to be faithful to him, had betrayed that trust, and there was no going back. Daniel's mind was still spinning, the images of their life together, the family they had built, now felt like a distant memory. He didn't know what to say. Words couldn't capture the feeling of betrayal. It was as if everything he had believed in, everything he had worked for, had been a lie. And there, standing in front of him, was the woman who had torn it all apart. How long? Daniel's voice was barely above a whisper, the words tasting bitter in his mouth. How long has this been going on? Megan hesitated, her eyes avoiding his. 6 months, she finally admitted. "I never wanted you to find out like this. I was going to tell you, but I kept putting it off. I'm sorry." The apology didn't matter now. 6 months of lies, 6 months of her living a double life. Daniel felt the rage building inside him, but it was tempered by a deep, gnawing sadness. He had loved her so much. He had trusted her with everything. And now it felt like that trust had been shredded, irreparably broken. "I don't know what to do with this," Daniel muttered, shaking his head. "I don't know who you are anymore." Megan's face crumpled with emotion. "Daniel, please. I know I've made a terrible mistake, but I still love you. I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose our family." The words sounded desperate, but Daniel couldn't bring himself to respond. He wanted to believe her, wanted to find some way to make things work, but how could he? How could he trust her again after everything that had happened? As the silence stretched between them, Daniel's mind drifted back to Chris's phone call. What did it all mean? Was Megan's infidelity a one-time mistake, or was it something deeper? Was she still involved with Tom, or had she truly ended the affair? Daniel didn't know if he could ever get the answers he needed, and right now, he wasn't sure he even wanted them. The pain was too raw, too real. Megan stepped closer, reaching for his hand, but Daniel pulled away. He couldn't bear to touch her, not now. Not after everything she had done. He needed space, needed time to process what was happening, to figure out what came next. I think we need some time apart," Daniel said, his voice firm but filled with the weight of his heartbreak. Megan's eyes filled with tears as she nodded, understanding the finality in his tone. "I understand. I'll leave. I'll give you the space you need." Daniel turned and walked out of the kitchen, the weight of his decision hanging heavily on his shoulders. He couldn't look at Megan anymore, couldn't stand to be in the same room as her. The family he had known was gone, replaced by a cold, empty space that felt too big to fill. The next few days were a blur of paperwork and emotions. Daniel moved into the guest room while Megan stayed in their bedroom, both of them trapped in their own worlds of pain and confusion. The children noticed the tension but were too young to understand the gravity of what was happening. They kept asking where their mother was, why Daniel wasn't around as much. It tore at Daniel's heart to see their confusion, but he didn't have the answers. He wasn't sure if he ever would. As the days stretched into weeks, Daniel's mind wandered to one question that seemed to haunt him. What now? He couldn't ignore the reality of his situation. Megan had betrayed him, and although part of him wanted to find a way to forgive her, another part of him knew that trust, once broken, was nearly impossible to rebuild. The pain was too fresh, the wounds too deep. It wasn't long before Daniel made the difficult decision to file for divorce. He knew it wasn't going to be easy, but he couldn't keep living in the shadow of what Megan had done. He needed to move on for his own sake, for the sake of their children. He couldn't let the past define his future. As he sat at his desk, filling out the divorce papers, Daniel's thoughts turned to the future. A future without Megan, without the life they had built together. The idea terrified him, but it also gave him a strange sense of clarity. He would have to fight for custody of Noah and Olivia, and he would have to fight to rebuild his life, step by painful step. But first he had to face the truth. His perfect life was over. And the road ahead would be far from easy. The days after Daniel filed for divorce felt like a blur, a mix of emotion and cold, hard decisions that had to be made. Megan had tried in her own way to repair the damage she had caused, but her efforts were always met with silence or cold distance from Daniel. She apologized over and over, offering to go to counseling, promising to change, but Daniel couldn't bring himself to believe her. He couldn't look at her without seeing the betrayal in her eyes. The house, once a home filled with love and laughter, now felt hollow. The quiet spaces between Daniel and Megan grew longer and more uncomfortable. The children, too young to understand the depth of the fracture in their family, could only sense the change. Noah and Olivia became quieter, their laughter less frequent, as if they could feel the tension hanging in the air. It wasn't long before Daniel made the first real step towards a new life, a life without Megan. He met with a family lawyer to discuss the custody arrangement for Noah and Olivia. It was a painful decision, but Daniel knew that it was the right one for the kids. He couldn't trust Megan to be the mother she once was. How could he, after what had happened? The custody battle was messy. Megan fought hard to keep the children in her care, using every emotional appeal she could think of. She cried in front of the judge, claimed that Daniel was being unfair, that she was still a loving mother who had made a mistake. But Daniel had the evidence. He had the phone records, the hotel receipts, and the testimony of Chris, who had seen Megan with Tom. It was clear that Megan had broken their marriage, and now she was doing everything she could to hold on to the children as if nothing had happened. But the truth was undeniable. The judge saw through Megan's tears and her pleas. Daniel was awarded full custody of Noah and Olivia, and Megan was granted supervised visitation. The ruling was final. Megan's world, which had once seemed so secure, was now falling apart, just as Daniel's had. In the months that followed, Daniel focused on rebuilding his life. The divorce was finalized, and although he was relieved to have the legal battle behind him, there was still a lingering sense of emptiness. The house was quieter now, with only Noah and Olivia to keep him company. They had settled into a new routine, a new normal, but the ache of the past never fully went away. Daniel started to devote more time to his work. It had always been a passion for him, but now it became his escape. He threw himself into marketing campaigns, client meetings, and long hours at the office. His colleagues noticed the change in him. He was more focused, more determined, but there was also a sense of something lost in his eyes, a glimpse of the man he used to be before everything had come crashing down. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Daniel found himself walking through the city's park with Noah and Olivia. It was a rare moment of peace, a moment where they could just be together without the weight of everything else hanging over them. As they sat on a bench watching the sunset, Noah spoke up. "Dad, when will things be normal again?" Noah's voice was soft, unsure. Daniel looked down at his son, who was trying to make sense of the world as best as he could. Olivia, sitting next to him, clung to his side, as if seeking comfort from the only stability she had left. Daniel sighed, the weight of the question heavy on his heart. He had no answer. He didn't know when or even if things would ever return to normal. All he could do was promise them that he would do his best to make sure they were okay, to give them a home where they felt safe and loved. "Things may never be exactly the same again," Daniel said softly, "but we'll make it work, Noah. We'll be okay. We have each other." That was all he could offer, hope. A fragile hope that one day they would heal, that they would move on from the pain of the past and create something new. Daniel didn't know how long that would take, or what the future held, but he knew he couldn't give up on them. He had to be strong for his children, for himself, and for the future they would all share. As the days turned into weeks, Daniel began to realize something he hadn't expected. He wasn't alone. He had been so focused on the loss of his marriage, so consumed by the betrayal, that he had forgotten about the people around him. His friends, his family, his colleagues, they were all there, supporting him in ways he hadn't fully appreciated. They reminded him of the strength he still had, the strength that was slowly but surely bringing him back to life. And then one day something unexpected happened. While at a work event, Daniel met someone, a woman named Rachel. She was confident, kind, and funny with a smile that lit up the room. They struck up a conversation, and for the first time in a long while, Daniel felt a spark of something he had thought he'd lost. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was the possibility of something new, something that didn't carry the weight of betrayal with it. As they exchanged numbers and promised to meet again soon, Daniel realized that while his past would always be a part of him, it didn't have to define his future. He wasn't sure where things would go with Rachel, but for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to feel hope. Hope that love could come again in a different form, in a way that wasn't tainted by the scars of the past. The weeks following Daniel's encounter with Rachel were filled with a quiet sense of anticipation. They met a few times, each meeting becoming more comfortable than the last. Rachel, a freelance graphic designer, had a way about her that made Daniel feel at ease, as if he could talk about anything and everything. There was no pressure, no expectations, just two people who enjoyed each other's company. For Daniel it was a revelation. He had spent so much of the past year buried in anger, confusion, and heartbreak that he had forgotten what it was like to simply enjoy someone else's presence. Rachel wasn't a solution to his problems. She didn't erase the pain of his past, but she offered him something new. She brought light into a life that had been darkened by betrayal. Slowly, Daniel found himself looking forward to their conversations, to the small moments that reminded him there was still joy to be found. One evening, as they sat in a cozy coffee shop, Rachel asked him about his children. Daniel smiled as he spoke about Noah and Olivia, about how they had adjusted to their new life, how much they had grown. Rachel listened intently, her eyes warm with genuine interest. It was clear that she cared, but she never pushed him to reveal more than he was ready to share. "They're doing well," Daniel said, his voice soft. "It's been hard for them, especially at first. But we're getting there. I'm doing my best to make sure they feel loved, even though everything's changed." Rachel nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I can't imagine how difficult that must be. But I can tell they're lucky to have you as their dad." The words were simple, but they touched Daniel more deeply than he had expected. For so long he had been focused on the loss of his marriage, the rupture in his life. But Rachel's words reminded him of the strength he had, the role he played as a father. His children were his responsibility, but they were also his source of hope, the reason he kept going even when things seemed impossible. As their relationship blossomed, Daniel began to find pieces of himself that he thought had been lost forever. He wasn't the same person he had been before the divorce. He couldn't be, but he was evolving, adapting. The pain of the past was still there, lurking just beneath the surface, but it didn't control him anymore. He had learned to accept it, to move forward in spite of it. Still, there were moments when Daniel would find himself lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wrestling with a quiet ache in his chest. He missed his family, the life they had once shared, and sometimes the loneliness felt unbearable. But in those moments, he reminded himself of the progress he had made. He wasn't the same man who had stood in the kitchen, staring at the birth control pills, crushed by the weight of betrayal. He was stronger now, more self-aware, and more focused on the future he wanted to build for himself and his children. And then one evening as he was tucking Noah and Olivia into bed, Noah looked up at him with wide, curious eyes. "Dad," Noah said, his voice small, "are you going to marry Rachel?" Daniel froze for a moment, surprised by the question. He hadn't expected Noah to bring up Rachel so soon. They had been dating for a few months, but Daniel hadn't yet spoken to the kids about her in any serious way. They were still adjusting to the changes in their lives and he didn't want to rush things. "I don't know yet, buddy," Daniel replied softly, brushing Noah's hair back. "But Rachel is a good friend and she's someone I really like. We'll see what happens." Noah seemed satisfied with the answer, nodding before closing his eyes. Daniel kissed him on the forehead and turned to Olivia, who was already asleep, clutching her favorite stuffed animal. As he walked out of the room he felt a small pang of guilt. Was he moving too quickly? Was he setting himself up for another disappointment? But as he looked at the quiet house, the faces of his children peacefully asleep, Daniel realized that he wasn't rushing. He was simply opening himself up to the possibility of happiness again. He didn't know what the future held, but he was learning to trust in the journey, to let go of the past and allow space for new beginnings. A few weeks later, Daniel invited Rachel to dinner at his house. It was a simple evening, nothing fancy, just the two of them enjoying a quiet meal together. Noah and Olivia were out at a friend's house, giving Daniel the time he needed to finally introduce Rachel to his home, to the life he was trying to rebuild. Rachel smiled when she saw the children's artwork pinned to the fridge, the family photos lining the walls. It was clear she was taking the situation seriously. She respected Daniel's space, his children, and the life he had worked so hard to create. It was one of the reasons Daniel had grown so fond of her. She didn't rush him or push him into anything. She simply supported him in the way he needed to be supported. "I like your home," Rachel said, looking around with a smile. "It feels warm, like there's a lot of love here." Daniel's heart swelled with a mixture of gratitude and hope. For the first time in a long time, he believed that maybe, just maybe, things were going to be okay. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but with Rachel by his side and with his children at the center of his world, Daniel felt like he was on the right path. As the months passed, Daniel found himself slowly adjusting to his new reality. His life, once so intricately woven together with Megan's, had become something completely different, but not necessarily worse. It was quieter, yes, and there were moments when he longed for the way things used to be, but he had also begun to appreciate the new rhythms of his life. The divorce had been a painful, messy ordeal, and the scars of betrayal still lingered, but he was learning to live with them. The process wasn't linear, and there were days when the weight of it all felt too much to bear. Yet every day he kept going. For Noah and Olivia. For himself. Rachel had become a steady presence in his life. They grew closer with each passing week, their connection deepening in ways Daniel hadn't expected. She was patient with him, understanding that he wasn't ready to rush into anything serious. But even in their slower pace, she had made it clear that she cared about him and was willing to wait for him to figure things out. She wasn't trying to replace Megan, nor was she asking him to forget the past. She simply wanted to be a part of his future. But there were moments when Daniel struggled with guilt. He would catch himself thinking about Megan, the woman he had once loved so deeply, and the family they had built. Could he truly move on from her? Was it fair to Rachel, to the kids, to everyone involved to let go of the life he had imagined for so long? These were the thoughts that kept him up at night. And it wasn't just guilt that weighed on him. There was anger too, anger at Megan for the betrayal, anger at himself for not seeing the signs earlier, anger at the life that had been taken from him. Sometimes, it felt like he was constantly fighting against the ghosts of his past, trying to move forward while being dragged back by old wounds. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, Daniel sat alone in his living room, the silence of the house pressing in on him. He picked up his phone and scrolled through old photos, images of happier times before the divorce, before everything fell apart. There was one picture that stood out, a family portrait taken just a few months before everything changed. Megan was smiling next to him, Noah and Olivia beaming in front of them. It was a picture of a life that no longer existed. Daniel put the phone down, his throat tight. The urge to call Megan was overwhelming, to ask her how things had gone so wrong, to hear her voice again. But deep down he knew it wasn't the answer. Megan had made her choices, and as painful as it was, he had to face the reality that they were no longer a family. Just then his phone buzzed, pulling him out of his thoughts. It was a text from Rachel. "Hey, I was thinking about you. Want to grab dinner tomorrow? Just the two of us." The message was simple, but it warmed Daniel's heart. Rachel wasn't pressuring him, wasn't demanding anything. She was just offering companionship, and for the first time in a long time, Daniel felt like he could accept that. Maybe it was time to stop looking back so much and start looking forward. The next evening, Daniel met Rachel at a small restaurant in the city. The mood was light, the conversation easy. They talked about everything and nothing, about work, about their favorite books, about what they wanted in the future. It wasn't a deep, life-altering conversation, but for Daniel, it was exactly what he needed. It reminded him that life could still be simple, that not every moment had to be weighed down by the past. As they sat across from each other, Rachel reached out and touched Daniel's hand. "I'm really glad we're doing this," she said, her voice soft. "I know you've been through a lot, and I just want you to know that I'm here. No pressure, no expectations, just here with you." Daniel smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. He squeezed her hand in return, grateful for her patience, for her understanding. "I'm glad too," he said quietly. "I didn't think I'd be ready for something like this, but you've made it easier than I expected." Rachel's smile was warm and reassuring. "You don't have to rush anything, Daniel. I know healing takes time. Just know that I'm here whenever you're ready." As they left the restaurant later that evening, walking side by side down the quiet streets of the city, Daniel felt a sense of peace settle over him. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was moving in the right direction. He still had a long way to go, but he was no longer standing still. He was learning to live again, to embrace the possibilities of the future without being trapped by the past. The next few weeks were filled with small moments of joy. Daniel continued to bond with Rachel, growing more comfortable with the idea of opening his heart to someone new. He also spent quality time with Noah and Olivia, finding ways to help them adjust to their new life. He took them on weekend trips, helped them with their homework, and did everything he could to make sure they felt loved and supported. Megan, on the other hand, seemed to retreat further into herself. She continued with her supervised visitations with the children, but her efforts to regain Daniel's trust were minimal. She had tried to maintain her image as a devoted mother, but it was clear to everyone, including Noah and Olivia, that things had changed. Megan's relationship with Tom had only deepened, and it became increasingly difficult for her to hide the truth from her children. As the months passed, Daniel found himself no longer caring about what Megan was doing, no longer feeling the need to understand her actions or seek closure. He had accepted that some things weren't meant to be fixed. His focus was on building a better life for himself and his children, one that was grounded in honesty, trust, and love. One evening, as Daniel sat in the living room with Noah and Olivia, watching them laugh over some silly cartoon, he realized that, despite everything, he had found his way. The road to healing had been long, but it was leading him somewhere new. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he was okay with that. He was ready to face whatever came next, whether it was with Rachel, with his children, or on his own. He was ready to live again. The days turned into weeks, and Daniel's life slowly began to take shape in ways he hadn't anticipated. His relationship with Rachel had blossomed, their connection deepening as they continued to explore their shared moments of joy and laughter. While Daniel was still processing the pain of his past, he no longer allowed it to dominate his thoughts. He had come to understand that healing was not about forgetting or erasing the past, but about accepting it and moving forward. Rachel had become an anchor in Daniel's life, a source of stability that he had desperately needed. She didn't ask him to change overnight, didn't pressure him to rush into anything, but simply supported him. Her patience was a gift, and it allowed Daniel the space to rediscover who he was outside of his marriage to Megan. He had also continued to focus on his children, Noah and Olivia. Their well-being was his top priority. He made sure to create new traditions with them, ones that weren't tied to the old life they had shared with Megan. They started a weekly movie night, where they would pick a film, make popcorn, and just enjoy each other's company. It became their special ritual, a way for them to bond, and for Daniel to show them that despite everything, they were still a family. One afternoon, Daniel sat in his office, reviewing a new marketing campaign for his company. His phone buzzed on the desk and he glanced at the screen. It was a text from Rachel. "How about dinner tonight? Just the two of us? I'll make your favorite." Daniel smiled, a warmth spreading through him. The simple message felt like an invitation to a new chapter, one where his life wasn't defined by the scars of the past but by the promise of what was to come. He quickly typed back, "I'd love that. Can't wait." As he put the phone down, Daniel reflected on how far he had come. He had spent so many months drowning in the aftermath of his divorce, convinced that he would never find happiness again. But now, he was beginning to understand that happiness wasn't something that happened overnight. It was a choice he had to make every day. That evening, when Daniel arrived at Rachel's apartment, the warmth of her smile greeted him. She had prepared a simple but delicious meal, and as they sat down to eat, they shared stories and laughter, the easy kind that came with being in each other's company without expectation. It wasn't extravagant, but for Daniel, it was everything. It was a reminder that life could still be good, even after everything that had happened. After dinner, as they sat on the couch with glasses of wine, Rachel turned to him with a thoughtful look. "Daniel," she said softly, "I know things haven't been easy for you, and I don't want to rush anything. But I want you to know that I'm here whatever happens. I'm not going anywhere." Daniel's heart swelled with gratitude. He reached out, taking her hand in his. "I don't deserve you, Rachel," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I'm so thankful you're here. I didn't think I could open my heart again, but you've made it possible." Rachel smiled, her eyes filled with understanding. "You don't have to deserve anything. Love isn't about deserving. It's about being there for each other, through the good and the bad." Daniel squeezed her hand, feeling a sense of peace settle over him. The road to healing was still ongoing, but it no longer felt as daunting. He wasn't in this alone. He had Rachel by his side, and more importantly, he had Noah and Olivia. His children, his reason for everything. In the weeks that followed, Daniel found himself growing more confident in his ability to navigate this new chapter. He continued to work hard, but he also made time for Rachel, for his children, and for himself. He even started to allow himself to dream again, dreams that weren't confined to the past, but ones that involved the future he wanted to build. His relationship with Megan had settled into a tense, distant coexistence. Megan continued to visit Noah and Olivia under supervision, but there was no longer any trace of the closeness they had once shared. Daniel had accepted that there was no going back, and he was finally okay with that. He had to let go of the anger and the resentment that had once consumed him. Holding on to those feelings wouldn't help him move forward. And moving forward was all he could do now. One afternoon, Daniel sat with Noah and Olivia watching them play a game of cards. The sound of their laughter filled the room, and for a moment, Daniel let himself feel a sense of contentment. His life wasn't perfect, but it was his. And that was enough. As he sat there watching his children, Daniel realized something important. He wasn't defined by his marriage to Megan, nor was he defined by the pain of his divorce. He was defined by his ability to adapt, to keep going, to love again. And in that moment he knew that no matter what came next he would be okay.